Today we are going to look at writing a clear and concise method section. For this lesson, we are going to follow this outline. We are going to first start by looking at an overview of the method section, followed by components of the method section, then general considerations when writing the method section of a research paper. And then we're going to look at practical examples and end with a conclusion. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the purpose and the importance of the method section. Secondly, you should be able to identify the key components of a well-structured method section. You should be able to apply best practices for writing a method section. And lastly, you should be able to recognize and correct common mistakes in writing the method section of a research paper. As an overview of the method section, we know that a research paper is structured through the IMRAD structure. The IMRAD structure is made up of the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. We have to note that the method section of a research paper is the heart of a research paper, and though it is often poorly written, approximately 30% of rejections by journals are related to the methodology or the method section of that paper. A well-written method section helps the peer review process, enhancing the chances of acceptance of the manuscript. It increases also the chances of inclusion of the study findings in secondary analysis of existing data, as well as in systematic reviews or meta-analysis. The method section is important because it is at the crossroad connecting the introduction to the results section. The method section should clearly present the approach to answer the main study questions or hypotheses. The method section answers the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and the why of your study procedures. It answers the who are the participants, and so on and so forth. The what was studied, what data was collected, what procedures were carried out. The when was the study carried out, where was the study carried out, how was the study procedure conducted, and why were those procedures employed. The two main functions of the method section and why it is important to write the method section appropriately is for reproducibility. Reproducibility ensures the repeatability and the conviction that your work was done appropriately. And secondly, it provides a clear and precise descriptions of the study procedure, which makes your study to be able to be replicable. The components of a method section. The method section follows structured reporting guidelines per study type. We have the consult guidelines for the clinical trials. We have the stroke guidelines for observational studies. We have the START guidelines for diagnostic research, and we have the PRISMA guidelines for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. The stroke guidelines, which stands for Strengthening the Reporting of Observational Studies in Epidemiology, provides a checklist of items to be included in observational studies. This is an example of the stroke guidelines. The stroke guidelines is made up of key important sections that should appear in your method section. We have the study design. In the study design, you should clearly present the key elements of your study design early in the paper. That should be at the top. Secondly, you should present the setting, the study setting. You have to describe the setting, the location, the relevant dates, including the periods of recruitment, exposure, follow-up, and data collection. Also, there should be a section for participants. If you're doing a cohort study, you need to give us the eligibility criteria that was used, the sources and the methods of selection of the participants, and describe the methods of follow-up in case of a cohort study. In case of a case control study, you have to give the eligibility criteria, the sources and methods of case ascertainment and control selection. You also have to give the rationale for the choice of cases and controls. For cross-sectional studies, you have to give the eligibility criteria as well as the sources and the methods of the selection of the participants. We also have to note that for core studies where matching is done, criteria should be given for the matching and the number of exposed and unexposed participants that were matched, as well as case control studies. If matching is done, criteria should be given for the matching and then the number of controls per case that were matched. Also, another section or subsection of the method section of the research paper is the variables. You need to clearly define all the outcomes, the exposures, the predictors, the potential confounders, and the effect modifiers, and give the diagnostic criteria where applicable. Also, you should present the data sources of measurement. How was your data measured? For each variable of interest, you should give the sources of data and the details of the method of assessment or the method of measurement. You have to describe the comparability of assessment methods if there's more than one group of assessments. Also, present the bias, describe any effort that was used to address potential sources of bias in your study. You have to present the study size. How was the study size arrived at? You have to clearly define your quantitative variables, explain how the quantitative variables were handled in the analysis. And also, you need to include the statistical methods, describe all the statistical methods that were used, including those that were used to control for confounding. Describe any methods that were used to examine subgroups and interaction or associations, and explain how missing data were addressed. Also, we need to describe any sensitivity analysis that was done. For the consult guidelines, it's a little bit different. Consult guidelines are for clinical trial. The consult guidelines is made up of the patient and public involvement succession, the trial design, the changes to trial protocol, the trial setting, the eligibility criteria, the intervention and comparator, the outcomes, the harms, the sample size that was used. So these are the guidelines that we use for clinical trials. For systematic reviews, we use what we call the PRISMA guidelines. The PRISMA guidelines is made up of the eligibility criteria, the information sources, the search strategy, the selection process, the data collection process, the data items, the study risks of bias assessment, the effect measures, the synthesis methods, reporting of bias assessment, and certainty assessment. That is that concerning the guidelines that we use for the method section of a research paper. Now, we're going to look at the components of the method section. There is no general chronology used in writing the method section, and it sometimes differ. The different journals have specific ways in which they want the meta sections to be written. So order and chronology might differ per journal, and it's important to check with the journal which you want to submit your paper to know how the structure is supposed to be. But here are generally how subsections of the method section should be written. It is made up of the study design, the study population, the data collection, data analysis, and ethical consideration. And each subsection can have additional subheadings where appropriate. For the study design, it is important to include the type of study, the setting, and the time frame. So the type of study is the methodology that was used. Was it a cross-sectional study? Was it an analytical study? Was it a comparative versus non-comparative? If it's an experimental study, you need to precise whether randomization was used, whether blinding was used, where applicable. If it's an observational study, you need to tell us if it's a cohort study, And if so, was it retrospective or prospective? You tell us whether it was a cross-sectional study, a case control study, or a secondary or post hoc analysis. For the study setting, you need to tell us the place or the location where the study occurred. Was it hospital-based? Was it an outpatient clinic? Was it a laboratory? Was it a single center or multiple centers? Was it a community or a school? That should be precised in your study setting. For the study duration, you need to precise the time frame in which the study took place. It's important because practices and trends change over time. These factors have implications for clinical practice, generalizability, and validity of your research paper. So it is very abnormal to write your method section and you don't include a time frame in which the data was collected, when the study was done, where the study was done. These are very important for clinical practice and generalizability and validity of your study. For the study population, it's important to include basic demographics of your study population. Were they adults or children? What was their age? What was their sex? Or disease status where applicable. You have to include specifications of the criteria that you use in selecting your participants, the methods of selection, that is the sampling and the recruitment process. For the eligibility criteria, you need to clearly precise or clearly state the inclusion and the exclusion criteria with justification and distinguish the target population from the accessible or study population. The selection methods, you need to precise the selection methods that you use, the sources and the methods for sampling. For example, did you use a probability sampling? Was it random? Was it stratified? Or was it clustered? If it was a non-probabilistic, was it convenient sampling or consecutive or purposive sampling? That should be clear from your study, as well as the recruitment process. Explain how the recruitment was conducted and its effectiveness. Measures that were taken to minimize refusals or dropouts. That should be clearly stated from your method section. Also, there's a section on data collection in which you outline the variables that were used. You have to clearly specify how each variable was measured and the different variable types. Were they predictor variables, that is exposure or independent variables? Were they outcome variables, which is the dependent variable? Were they confounding or interaction or effect modifiers variables? That should be clearly precise. Also, we need to precise the measurement methods and the instruments that were used. Describe the tools or instruments used, including the manufacturer, model, calibration, and measurement procedures where applicable. Indicate the validity and the reliability of the measurement methods and tools that you use, as well as precise if the instruments used were validated and adapted for the target population. Another subsection of the method section is the data analysis. This is where you precise or you summarize the main variables, the means, the median, the standard deviations, the ranges, frequencies, proportions that were used. We have to ensure in this section alignment with study objective and plan results presentation. Report hypothesis testing, confidence intervals, regression or modeling methods, how handling of missing data and sensitivity analysis was done, and also present sample size calculation and power analysis. State the type 1 error level that was used and report statistical softwares used with reference. And the last section of the method section is the ethical consideration. Precise the institutional review board or ethics committee that gave approval for the study. Clearly report the different consent procedures that were used and the confidentiality procedures that were used in your methodology. As general considerations, it is important to use the past tense, either passive or active. It's important to avoid errors such as mixing the results with the methods. So in no way should you present results in the method section. Another error to avoid is writing this section as a set of instructions. You have to report what was done and not instruct what should be done. Also, another error to avoid is to include information that is irrelevant to the reader. We're going to look at an example. This is a paper that was produced, that was written by CRENC, by the host organization. So this is a paper on co-prevalence and associations of diabetes mellitus and hypertension among people living with HIV/AIDS in Cameroon. So we're going to look how the method section was written in this paper. For this method section, it begins with the study, design, and the setting. It says data from Cameroon collected from the International Epidemiology Databases to evaluate AIDS study forms the basis for this analysis. So it gives us the study setting. The study was done in Cameroon. It was done using data from the IDEA study. It continues by saying the Cameroon data included in the current study were collected from January 2026 to December 2021. So that's the study timeline. It is clearly stated when the data was collected. Also, it is clear what type of study was done. It says the current analysis used baseline cross-sectional data collected. So this was a cross-sectional study. Okay, so it was analysis of cross-sectional study. Also, it is clearly presented the ethical considerations that were used. Ethical approval for the study was obtained from the Comité National pour la Recherche en Santé Humaine in Cameroon. Also, it is clearly presented the study participants and the data collection that was done for this particular study. Also, it is presented the different outcome variables that were used, the different confounding variables that were used in this particular study. Also, there's the section on the statistical analysis, the statistical analysis software that was used, that was R version 4.23 that was used, the percentile, the median, the frequencies, the proportions, the confidence intervals, the different statistical tests, which is chi-square and Fisher's test, the logistic regressions that were used in the analysis, and also the p-value that was used for statistical significance. In conclusion, a poorly written method section is a threat to reproducibility. It compromises validity and reliability. It lowers reporting quality and difficulty in peer review and physical appraisal, and impact on indexing and citation. These are the references that we use. Thank you very much.